She said, I make more money, so I deserve more say in our relationship. I said, you're right. Then I stopped paying for everything I'd been covering. Her Excel spreadsheet the next week revealed the truth. I, 32 male, never thought I'd be writing this post. I've read so many of these stories thinking, there's no way people are this oblivious. But here I am. I'm a logistics coordinator for a shipping firm. I make a decent living, low six figures, good benefits. I'm the guy who keeps the trains running on time. For 3 years, I lived with my fiancée. When we met, she was an associate at a marketing agency, drowning in student loans and entry-level pay. I didn't mind. I owned my condo before we met, so I covered the mortgage, the HOA, and the utilities. She bought groceries and handled streaming services. It worked. We were a team. Then, about 6 months ago, everything shifted. She landed a massive role as a VP at a tech startup. Her salary didn't just double. With equity and bonuses, she was suddenly pulling in nearly 3 times what I make. I was genuinely proud of her. I popped the champagne. I bragged to my parents. But almost immediately, the air in the house changed. It wasn't just the money. It was a sudden, suffocating superiority. She started making comments about my quaint job. She dictated where we ate, who we hung out with, and how the house should look, bypassing any discussion we usually had. The breaking point happened on a Tuesday. We were discussing the wedding budget. I wanted to keep it intimate. She wanted a destination blowout in Italy. When I pointed out that asking my family to fly to the Amalfi Coast was unrealistic for their budgets, she rolled her eyes and didn't even look up from her phone. She said, we need to upgrade our lifestyle. And honestly, since I make more money, I deserve more say in our relationship. That's just how equity works. The room went dead silent. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. She finally looked up, waiting for me to argue, to fight back, to raise my voice. Instead, I felt this cold clarity wash over me. It was like a switch flipped. I realized she didn't see a partner anymore. She saw an employee. So I just said, you're right. She blinked, surprised. I am. I nodded and took a sip of water. Absolutely. Capital dictates policy. If you're contributing the majority of the value, you should have the majority of the vote. It's only fair. She smiled this smug, satisfied little curl of the lips and said, I'm glad you're finally being sensible. I'll book the venue tomorrow. The next morning, I started the process. See, she assumed equity, meant she got to control the decisions while I continued to subsidize the infrastructure of her life. She had zero idea what it actually cost to be us because I handled all the boring, invisible logistics. I logged into my bank account and removed her as an authorized user on my Amex Platinum, the card she used for her client lunches, and Sephora runs that I paid off every month for points. Next, I called my car insurance provider. I had added her to my policy 2 years ago because her driving record was spotty and my premium was lower. I had her removed. Then came the household expenses. I canceled the auto pay on the internet, the cable, and the cleaning service. I changed the password to the Netflix, Hulu, and HBO accounts. But the masterstroke was the lifestyle audit. Since she wanted to run our relationship like a corporation based on financial input, I decided to treat her like a tenant. I pulled the property tax records, the HOA assessments, and the market value for rent in our area. 3 days later, the first crack appeared. She yelled from the living room asking why the Wi-Fi was down. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich and told her I wasn't sure, but my hotspot was working fine. She told me to fix it because she had a Zoom call, and I calmly told her I couldn't because I didn't pay the bill. I explained that since she makes more money, I figured she'd want to handle the service provider that offers the best speed for her needs. So I didn't want to overstep. She huffed, called me petty, and paid it on the spot with her credit card. 2 days later, her card got declined at a sushi restaurant where she was treating her friends. She came home furious, screaming that I cut off her card and made her look like an idiot. I corrected her, reminding her it was my card, and since she has massive income now, she shouldn't need mine. She stormed off, but I knew she was brewing something. She was used to winning arguments by overwhelming people with rapid-fire talking points. On Sunday night, She walked into the living room with her laptop and hooked it up to the TV. She had prepared a presentation, a literal Excel spreadsheet projected on the wall. She told me we were going to look at the numbers because she didn't think I understood how much she actually contributed. She started listing things. The groceries she bought last week, $200. The dinner she paid for, $150. The new towels, $80. She even had a column for emotional labor, which she had arbitrarily assigned a monetary value. She pointed to the bottom line and said she had contributed $3,000 to the household in the last month alone, accusing me of being insecure because she was the breadwinner now. I stood up and told her to stay right there. I went to my office, grabbed my laptop, unplugged her HDMI cable, and plugged mine in. I told her we should look at the real P&L statement. My spreadsheet was forensic. I listed the mortgage, market rent equivalent, at $3,200 per month since I had been charging her $0. HOA fees were $450. The lease on the Audi she drove, which was in my name, was $680. Her car insurance was $210. Her health insurance, since she was on my plan as a domestic partner, was a $400 deduction from my paycheck. Utilities were $350. Dates and vacations averaged $800 a month. I read the total monthly cost of living provided by me aloud, $6,090. I looked her dead in the eye and explained that her contribution of $3,000 covered the groceries she ate and the streaming services she watched, meaning she was running a deficit of $3,090 a month. And that wasn't including the last 3 years where I paid for everything while she paid off her student loans. Her face went pale. The math was unassailable. But instead of apologizing, the entitlement just mutated. She scoffed and asked if I was charging her rent in a house I owned, calling it predatory, and reminding me she was my fiancée, not a roommate. I reminded her that she set the rules. Money buys the say. If she wanted 51% of the vote, she needed 51% of the equity. Right now, she was a minority shareholder at best. She slammed her laptop shut and said fine. She'd write me a check for the $3,000 difference right then and there, and then she would decide where we got married. She opened her banking app, tapped the screen, frowned, and tapped it again. A look of genuine confusion, then panic, crossed her face. She didn't have the money. I leaned in and asked how that was possible. She takes home nearly $12,000 a month after taxes, pays no rent, and has no car payment. She tried to close the app, but I was faster. I saw the transaction history. Transfer to MOM for $1,500. Transfer to MOM, $2,000. Payment to lawyer retainer, $5,000. My stomach dropped. I asked why she was sending her mother $6,000 a month and why she had a lawyer. She got defensive immediately, claiming her mom needed help buying a rental property for retirement and it was an investment. I asked if she was using our wedding money, the money she was saving while I paid her way. She screamed that it was her money and she earned it. Then I asked about the lawyer. Her voice dropped to a whisper as she admitted it was for a prenup. She wanted to make sure her assets were protected before we got married, since she was a high earner now. The audacity was almost impressive. She was living off me, funneling her cash to her mother to buy property I would have no claim to, and paying a lawyer to ensure I couldn't touch her future assets, all while demanding I bow to her will because she made more. I told her to get out. She laughed and said I couldn't kick her out because she lived there and had rights. She said since she had been contributing to the household, she probably had a claim to the equity of the condo. She had clearly been talking to that lawyer already. She thought she had me cornered. She forgot that my entire job is understanding contracts, liabilities, and leverage. I told her I had spoken to a real estate attorney. In our state, she was technically a tenant at will. However, the dynamic changes when safety is involved. I handed her a formal 30-day notice to quit that I had already drafted just to cover my bases legally. Then I told her I was taking the Audi keys because the lease was in my name. She laughed and said I was bluffing because I loved her. I told her I loved the woman who split a pizza with me on a Tuesday, but I didn't know who she was anymore. I held out my hand for the keys. She threw them at my face. Hard. They nicked my cheek, drawing a small drop of blood. She hissed that she wasn't leaving, And if I tried to make her, she'd tell everyone I hit her. That was the moment the last shred of affection died. It was replaced by a cold, calculated need for total victory. She wanted a war. She was about to find out why you don't fight a logistics manager on his own turf. The threat of a false accusation is a nuclear option. She knew that. She stood there waiting for me to panic. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. I told her I had installed Wise cameras in the living room and hallway 3 days prior when she started talking about equity. I pointed to the bookshelf where the tiny white cube sat with solid blue light. I told her it records audio and video to the cloud, and it caught the keys and the threat. Her face went from red to ghost white. The air left the room. I told her to pack a bag because she was sleeping at her mother's house. She started crying. Not soft heartbreak crying, but the weaponized sobbing of a child caught stealing. She said she didn't mean it and was just stressed. I stepped back and demanded the keys. She dropped them on the table. I told her she didn't leave voluntarily. I would call the police and have her removed for domestic disturbance, citing the video evidence of assault. She packed a bag in 10 minutes, slamming drawers and cursing me. As she walked out, she threatened that her mother would destroy me. Her mother is a local socialite with delusions of grandeur. I locked the deadbolt behind her. The next morning, the digital assault began. My phone blew up with texts from her family calling me insecure and abusive. I ignored them. I called the dealership and arranged an early termination for the Audi. It cost me $4,000 in fees, but I paid it just to cut the tie. I returned the car that afternoon. When I got home, I found a locksmith drilling my lock. My ex was standing there with a man in a cheap suit. The suit claimed I couldn't lock her out illegally. I showed him the police report I had filed online regarding the assault, just for the paper trail, and explained she had vacated the premises voluntarily after assaulting me. She started screaming that she lived there. I asked the lawyer to show me her name on the deed or a lease. He hesitated. I told the locksmith to get off my porch, or I'd call the cops for breaking and entering. The locksmith packed up instantly. The lawyer looked at the Wise camera I pointed out, handed her a card, and retreated. She was left standing there alone. The power dynamic had fully inverted. She demanded her stuff. I told her I would hire professional movers to pack her belongings and deliver them to her mother's address, but she was not entering the property again without a police escort. She screamed about her laptop and work files, but I went inside and locked the door. 2 days later, I was served with a lawsuit. Her mother was suing me for unjust enrichment. They claimed the money she contributed to the household over 3 years constituted an investment in my property, demanding $50,000 or a lien. It was a shakedown tactic. I sat down with my lawyer, Marcus, who specializes in high-conflict separations. He said it was garbage, but would cost $10,000 to fight. I told him I wanted to countersue for fraud and conversion. I had done some digging, deep digging. I remembered seeing letters from the IRS a few months back that I had just handed to her. I also remembered helping her with an ethics disclosure form for her new job. I went in my cloud storage where I had a backup of her old laptop from a data transfer I did a year ago. I didn't snoop then, but I snoop now. I found emails between her and her mother. They explicitly discussed funneling cash through gifts, so I couldn't touch it if we divorced, planning to hide assets before we were even married. But the real kicker was the credit cards. She had opened 3 credit cards in my name 2 years ago. I have a common name, and since I trusted her, I wasn't monitoring my credit report obsessively. She had max amount, $15,000 total, and was making minimum payments from a secret account to keep it off my radar. That's identity theft. That's a felony. Marcus sent a demand letter to her attorney. He attached the credit card statements with the IP addresses used to open them, which match her old office, and an email thread about hiding assets. The offer was simple. Drop the lawsuit, pay off the $15,000 debt in full within 48 hours, sign a document admitting to fraud, and never contact me again. If they refused, I would file a police report. Her shiny new VP job at a publicly traded tech company would not survive a felony fraud investigation. They folded. The check was wired to my lawyer's escrow account by Friday. She signed the release. The movers took her stuff. The house felt empty but peaceful. She left a nasty note saying I ruined everything over money, but I just threw it away. The final twist came 2 weeks later. I ran into a mutual friend at the grocery store. She told me my ex got fired. Apparently, she tried to expense her legal fees for the lawsuit against me as consulting fees on the company card. Their internal audit caught it, and she was terminated for embezzlement. I stood in the frozen food aisle and laughed. She wanted to play the corporate game and treat relationships like transactions, but she violated company policy. It's been 3 months. I repainted the walls and bought a motorcycle. Her mother had to sell that rental property to cover the restitution my ex owed the tech company to avoid jail time. My ex is back in her childhood bedroom. I realized that when she said she deserved more say because she made more money, she was showing her true value system. She didn't value partnership. She valued leverage. I didn't win because I was smarter. I won because I was willing to walk away. In logistics, we have a saying, the most expensive shipment is the one you don't need. Relationships aren't about 50-50, and they certainly aren't about who makes more. If someone tries to use their paycheck as a gavel, let them govern their own empty kingdom.